Swimming like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Welcome back to another episode of the Shrimp Tank. We come to you virtually from Seattle, the great Pacific Northwest, and today we travel down I-5 into the Bay Area. Listen, if you want to learn how to start, grow, or run a successful business, this right here is the podcast for you. It's where we say street smarts and book smarts collide. Hello again, everyone. I'm Dan Whedon. My co-host today is Linda Popke, and our guest today is Jen Hope. Jen Hope is an executive and leadership coach for startup leaders. With a background as the vice president of marketing for multiple high-growth startup companies, Jen understands the complexity of startup leadership. She leverages data and evidence-based tools that accelerate growth and scale individual and collective leadership. When she's not cooing over her dogs or running around the Pacific Northwest, you may actually find her singing along to songs at CVS. I'm going to have to learn more about that, and that might be a question for later on down the road. Everybody, listen. And by the way, Jen, welcome. We will be with you in just a few minutes. Everybody, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube. Linda, we are
ubiquitous.
We are ubiquitous. We also come to you from a whole bunch of cities around the country, including the mothership in Atlanta, Boca Raton, Boston, Charleston. We're got a bunch of on the East Coast. We are the big name on the West Coast. That's, I guess, what we can say. Now, listen, before we bring on Jen, Linda, it's been about a month, I think, since I've seen you. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. The family has moved out. I'm no longer the halfway house. My daughter and son-in-law and the 4 grandkids have moved into their own house. But we brought in somebody new. We brought in a boarder.
Okay.
Yeah, we have our we have our 10th Rotary Exchange student living with us. Victor from Sweden just moved in. And you know, it's interesting, Linda, he and I just had an interesting conversation because I had picked him up after school and we started talking about detention. And it made me think of one of my favorite movies, dating me back to the 80s. I got to believe you remember The Breakfast Club?
Oh yeah, God, I haven't seen that in 100 years. Yeah.
Do you remember? You remember who some of the great actors there were, don't you?
Yeah, there were some great people in it. Yeah, it was all about detention. Yeah.
Yeah, Molly Ringwald and Judd Nelson, and I believe Charlie Sheen was in there as well. We have a
was there too. Yeah.
All the 80s Rat Pack were there. Linda, did you ever have Saturday detention?
No, I did not. I was never I did have to stay after school for an hour once, I think, in elementary school.
What did you do? What caused that?
I honestly don't remember, but I had to write something.
Were you playing the piano too loud in school? Was that a problem?
I was playing the piano when I was supposed to be studying. That's what it was.
I don't even remember them ever having a Saturday detention, which maybe they did. But the Breakfast Club certainly did. I'm gonna transition to our wonderful guest, Jen Hope. And by the way, I love your last name because we're always looking for hope. We finally have hope. Linda, we finally have hope on the show. That's our hope for the show. I got to ask you before we dive into what you do, Jen, you may remember the Breakfast Club. Here's my question for you, it's kind of a plead the fifth. If I was in some sort of school leadership position, what would I put you in detention for? Why would you have gone into a Breakfast Club Saturday detention?
I would say probably over socializing, right?
Over socializing.
Like, yeah, I was hanging out in the halls, chatting it up. Maybe being a little bit too protective of my younger sister. That might have happened too, a time or two. I was a senior when she was a freshman. So they knew her as the little J, and I was the big J, and so we definitely protected the little sister a little bit. So maybe a protective leader in my early days.
See, and there we got we're talking about leadership already, and I think some of us who are in consulting, those of us who over socialize probably went into consulting. Tell us a little bit more about you, Jen. We'd love to learn a little bit more about what you do in your business.
Yeah, so startups and technology leaders hire me to bring in intuitive leadership frameworks and tools into their leadership suite. So that would be, C-suite, vice presidents, senior directors, really trying to bring intention, new intention, a modern intention to leadership.
So what is a modern intention? How is that different than the old intention?
I go through this question a lot with folks. I think there's a new level of authenticity. There's a new level of vulnerability. There's a slight move away I see in some organizations from a more authoritative style to a more collaborative leadership style, where we're putting people right at the center, putting our well-being right at the center. And so those are some of the changes I'm seeing in kind of our modern world. And this is even, if we can call it post-COVID, right? The experience that we're having these days, where mental health is at the center, our well-being is at the center, people are at the center, right alongside outcomes and the metrics that we apply to, kind of our standard business operation.
So Jen, you mentioned startups and you mentioned technology, and I'm going to say something that's probably incredibly wrong, but in my mind, I think about a couple people in a garage starting up a technology business, like Steve Jobs. And even my brother-in-law, who's in they've been in the technology business 50 years, but it was him and his buddy literally starting up in their garage. So I have this vision of a few people who are really smart doing something like that. And then I sometimes I think things like leadership might be the last thing that they're thinking about. Talk about, first of all, tell me why I'm probably wrong about my assumption of that, but talk about how leadership in a startup business, especially in technology, comes to the forefront.
Yeah, can I tell you first about how right you are in some ways? Can I tell you first about that?
Yeah,
part?
I'd like that.
Can I start there? Okay. So I'll tell you a quick story about my one of my first startup experiences. I led marketing. I was the first marketing hire for a company that you might remember. It was really well known here in the Seattle area called Cheeseburger. And Cheeseburger was a humor website, but conglomerate, where it was the early days of memes. So like if you ever saw a cat photo in 2010, we likely helped popularize that and get that. I tell people a lot, like, you're welcome, I'm sorry, because we've seen what's happened to like meme culture, right? Kind of early days of internet culture. And my first role at Cheeseburger, I went in and it was a lot like you're talking about, Dan. We're down in Lower Queen Anne, which is, a specific area of the Seattle area. And I walk into this building and there's just people working at brown folding desks. Like as classic as you would imagine it, Dan. And like our coffee maker is in a closet, and we just had the wildest experience. There was a t-shirt e-commerce store run out of a conference room. Like it is exactly kind of like what you imagine, and it was brilliant people seeing an opportunity and running with it, right? And being able to find a business model and a way to get investors, and so we did that really kind of classic story that you're talking about. When we got, just a little quick side note, when we got our a round of investment, one of the things that we did was they bought a candy mountain effectively, and it was like as tall as me, a candy mountain in our office. So they just piled and piled and piled candy to 5 feet tall, and it sat in one corner of our office. And this was like our celebration of like, we made it to the top of the mountain. And so we bought, I don't even know, like hundreds of pounds of candy. And that's what we did as a celebration for one of our rounds of funding.
And nobody ever ate the candy.
No, not true. Not true. When
Oh.
you're working on the internet, like that, oh yeah, no, we were doing tons of candy, lots of energy drinks, lots of coffee, closet coffee. Yeah, no, it was, I would not say the healthiest of experiences at that moment. But yeah, we definitely did candy big time. So the flip side of that, one of the things that current leadership research suggests is that a business will not outperform the effectiveness of its leaders, right? And so one of the things that I try to bring to the forefront of some of the leaders I work with, they're already working with me, we're in connection, so they know the value of leadership. but we haven't always put together this idea that our leadership, and that being the way that we lead, how creative and competent we are as leaders, that will really affect the outcomes that we can create as a team, as an individual, and how that can limit pieces of our organization, and bringing hard conversations, things that, I know you've had guests who talk about what it's like to have hard conversations in a workplace, and having some of the depth of those conversations that we need to have, because they will truly limit us. So that's while yes, I agree with you, it may not be on the forefront. I think the really wise companies, the companies that are investing, are seeing success. They're seeing themselves be able to scale as a leadership team. I think the other point that I would add to that, in a startup organization, and I'm a great example of this, I was limited by not having leadership knowledge. I couldn't have given you a framework of what makes a great leader when I was already leading a team of 14, right? So I had a ton of potential. I had been a great marketer, I'd been a great hands-on marketer, and I was handed a team and said, now run with it, without manager training, right? And so this is part of my commitment, is bringing this back to the leaders that I see who can really use it.
So, one of the things, Jen, before we go to break, I know you work with women, and I'm in Silicon Valley, and I know when I came here a couple of decades ago, I was very often the only woman in the room. And when I look around Silicon Valley startups today, very often I could still be the only woman in the room. So how are you helping women kind of adjust in this leadership role in these types of startup organizations?
The shortest answer is helping women lead like women, right? And what that means is to support them leading in the relational way that we have evidence that proves is the more effective style, right? We have, and this is not to create any, no bias here about gender, but we just have data that suggests that women can be more effective leaders in the style, and that they balance the task and the relationship side of leadership so well. And that's one of those areas that we lean in to support that, and to support that. How we do it, what we do, is so valuable, and trying to shift to meet maybe what we see in front of us can happen. So kind of standing in that grounded confidence that the data suggests that, of course, all individuals are going to have limitations, right? We all have strengths, we all have limitations, but really leaning into how we do what we do as a strength.
Well, one of the things we do as a strength, Jen, is we got to pay the bills. And this has been a great conversation. We're going to do a lot more, but we're going to take a short break to hear from today's Spotlight sponsor. And when we come back with our guest, Jen Hope, for our Hot or Not section of the show, we're going to ask Jen about self-care. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank. Does this sound like you? I'd love to write a book, but I just don't have the time. In fact, I'm not even sure where to start. Maybe you have a compelling story to share, or valuable advice for clients and prospects. If only you could get that story out of your head and into a published format. Think you don't have time to write a book? Think you aren't a good enough writer to get your message across? Think this sounds all too overwhelming? Well, think again. At Leverage to Market Associates, we help aspiring authors transform that long-stuck book idea into an attractive published work. If you've written most of your book, we can help edit your work and drive it through the production process. If you're not sure where to start, we'll coach you through the creative process to organize your thoughts and create a compelling book line. And if you're just not comfortable writing a book yourself, we can ghost write it for you. Contact Leverage to Market Associates for a complimentary evaluation of your nonfiction book concept today and bring your book to life.
Okay, well, welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. I'm co-host Linda Popke, and our guest today is Jen Hope, and our next segment is Hot or Not. I went to the wrong segment. It's Hot or Not.
It is
Okay.
Hot or Not. I was a little worried about you there for a second, Linda. It
On
is
the
hot or
wrong
not.
page here.
And,
Yeah.
and Jen, what you should know, I know you've listened or watched a couple of our shows, or maybe a lot of them. We're going to pepper you with questions about business, about life, about leadership. Who knows? Maybe we'll even talk some dogs. But you're going to tell us if you think the concept is hot or not, and why or why not. I think I know the answer to this, but I'd like to hear more of a conversation because self-care has become certainly has amped up over the last couple of years. So hot or not, Jen, self-care for leaders.
Hot
Yeah.
with a caveat.
Oh, okay.
Hot being not a bubble bath. Hot being prioritizing mental health and well-being, prioritizing whatever it takes to keep yourself feeling well, staying out of reactivity, being able to be present in your day. So hotness, presence, right? Hotness being with family. Yeah. New
So
hotness.
let me ask this, because I work with, and I know Linda has too, we work with countless leaders, CEOs, presidents, but I think one of the things that I've noticed, and they've actually even said to me, is they don't recognize when they need some self-care. They're going hard. And in fact, even in times of stress and chaos, the focus is on growing the business and keeping employees and all of that. And they don't recognize when they're getting to a tipping point. Can you expound on that a little bit or give us your thoughts?
I have a great example. I worked with a client, recently, and the conversation we were having was some self-judgment about, oh, I was reactive at work. This person's behavior was really bothering me, right? Or I just noticed that I wasn't as patient as I'd like to be, right? And if we dug deeper, and we really did, we spent a little time there, it was some judgment about the behavior, but the behavior is a symptom. The behavior is the symptom of I'm under-resourced, I'm overscheduled, and I haven't scheduled some of those pieces, right? This is where the self-care comes in. If we're talking about folks who have a more introverted behavioral style, right? We're talking about folks who actually would benefit from scheduling, could benefit from scheduling alone time, right? If we look at the schedule and it's full of things where we are interacting with another human, right? Or being on, as we like to call, right? This is taxing. It's taxing our nervous system. It's taxing our energy resource. So, I think that's what I hear more often than not. I hear kind of secondhand, like the next step, which is I'm not the best version of myself. And we dig deeper and I'm exhausted, I'm overwhelmed, I'm not feeling confident, I don't have what I need, I don't have the connection that I need. That's one of the ones that I really like to talk to folks about. Like, what if you're that focused on work, are you interacting with the people that you care most about, right? Is it your friends? Is it family? Where are you finding that time to carve out to do these other things that fill your cup, like truly fill the fulfillment cup, not the the leadership achievement cup?
So Jen, so hot or not, being aware of and being sensitive to neurodiversity in the workplace.
Hot. I mean, sensitive to people and their experience, super hot.
So help me out, because now, boy, you used a big word on. Can you define what's for the people like me out there going neurodiversity? I think I know what that means, but I may not be sure. Can you define that?
Yeah, so we're talking about someone who has ADHD, is on the autism spectrum, lives with autism spectrum disorder. So being aware that we're not in any way clear on what's happening on the other side of a Zoom screen or a conference table, that's where I start. And it goes beyond, like I would say, it goes beyond even to communication and behavioral style, like being aware of our own bias around our preference in communication style or behavioral style, and making space for that in our team, in our leadership room, in our leadership team, that we can build awareness that then allows us to have more choice in those moments.
So I did a little research, obviously, on you, prowling around your website and some of the information you have. And you talked a little bit about leadership assessments, and I'm not going to ask you if it's hot or not, because you probably, I'm going to guess, think that they're hot. My question is this, because it either we've become very data driven. Especially it seems like over the past recent years, and whether it's leadership assessments or my golf stick, I keeping track of my golf game. We've become very data driven. What do you say to somebody who says, those leadership assessments, they're all the same. I don't really learn anything from them. What would you say to people who push back on them?
What I find is, in the same way that we're evolving, the way that we debrief that information is evolving, where we use it as a tool. I don't know, maybe y'all remember this, like the color of your parachute book, right? Where it said like, and DISC, I think, was very similar. We used it the same way, right? Like, you're a red, you're a yellow, and like, we're not a red, we're not a yellow, we're a human, right? And like, so it's really, and I really try to do this. I try to really be sensitive to the person in front of me and understand that we have a bunch of data in front of us that suggests that, Dan might behave X way under stress. And that could also like be something that we're tossing because it's not really representative of Dan's experience. And so I really like to sit with the person and understand for them and the complexity of how some of those preferences, like DISC, for example, play together. And that there's a person in front of us. And I really like to help folks think about the people that are opposite to them, not, hey, we have all these yellows on our team, or we have all these greens. Forget the judgment, forget the labels. Let's talk about the preferences of the person who's opposite to you, who might start to shut down if you're hyperverbal in a meeting, right? Or if we're too aggressive and we're leaning in and we're pounding the table, what's the reaction that's happening? Is it effective? Those are the questions that I'm asking folks to think about versus handing them a document that gets stuck in a drawer and says, you're a red.
So Jen, one of the things that's been kind of, in vogue for a while are these peer and groups for CEOs and entrepreneurs, right? We see them a lot. And I hear I talk to people, some folks get a lot out of it. Some people are sitting there saying, where's the beef? What's your feeling on it? Are they hot or are they not? I mean, is that worthwhile for an entrepreneur to consider? Or is it just, another place for people to get together and spend some time and not really get much out of it?
At the right level, I think it's hot, where you have folks who are beyond and a little bit behind where you are. I think it could be really valuable, right? If you're working with folks who can push you to see bigger, who can understand the structure of your organization and to help you see beyond where you are, like, it can accelerate. Like, we just know mentorship, right, can accelerate. It can help see around corners that we don't see. So in that way, I think it's really valuable. In other scenarios, I have seen folks who you have to use it, right? You have to actually show up. Some of it is you have to put in the time, and it can be long game. And so if you're going to go and show up, really give it a fair shot. That would be kind of my other suggestion.
So Jen, let's swerve and talk about you. I'm always interested in how entrepreneurs got to the place and time where they are today. Take us back. How did you get to the point where you started your own practice around helping startup technology with leadership?
So I started this practice as a side hustle. So I was working as a VP of marketing for a startup. So it gives you some indication about how much I knew about burnout, working as a VP of a startup and starting a side hustle. Like, wow, did I learn a lot. But at that point, the organization that I was working for was acquired by Expedia. And I had been doing this as a side hustle for about a year and a half, and saw a need, really. I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, our goal is to have impact, right? And so much of my goal was to have positive impact in the workplace, still is, right? And we talked about this before we started. It's really important to me to have positive impact in the workplace. And what I saw was a lot of startup leaders like myself landing in leadership roles and being on incredible timelines, like brutal, brutal timelines alone, because the team that they were working with, like all of us, kind of, we put our head down and we got to work. And to your point, Dan, like we really focused on the goal, right? And not focusing on the self or the people and the things that we really need. And so what I saw was a place to support these folks who really needed help. And there were folks who came, way back early in the day where we started more publicly talking about mental health, right? Like VC investors like Brad Feld, who was out in social media talking about his mental health experience and how difficult that was. And so there's a lot of reinforcement of how needed this was, and finding a place to be able to support folks. And so when the opportunity arrived, and I was, I could have gone into the big behemoth that was Expedia, and instead I jumped ship and became my own, lifestyle startup, I guess.
So I love that. I love that you've done that. And I guess what I want to do is pivot a little bit to where we are today. We're coming out of the pandemic, even though it seems to be kind of an ongoing slug, but we've got war in Ukraine, we've got inflation, we've got economy. It seems to me that the self-care and the need of leaders is still kind of, it gets wrapped up in all these other things that are hurting their organizations or hitting their organizations. What kind of challenges do you see today for leaders going into 2023 that maybe weren't there a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic? What do we do now to make sure our leaders aren't burning out?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. A lot of the folks I'm working with, they're balancing their home life, and I mean balancing, like, playing a delicate balance of how we spend time, right? And so making space, I think, for parents of young kids, and not making space, right? Like embracing, creating culture that it is all are welcome here, and we truly make space for that, embrace that in our culture. I think that's the most different thing that we see today, where we have folks with young kids and the challenges that are put on them. That also being said, like at this very moment today, I think I'm seeing leaders managing the uncertainty of their staff. How much certainty is there that we can give at this time with layoffs and an economy the way that it is, and folks in healthcare and folks in tech and what we're seeing around us, how to really manage some of the anxiety and the frenetic energy by being like a steady state, a balanced state, a composed state for these folks. I think that's one of the things that I'm really seeing folks want to be that steady state for their folks in the new year.
Well, we've got to remain steady and true to paying the bills again. I keep on saying that, but we are very happy to have our sponsor. We're going to hear from them in just a minute. But when we come back with our guest, Jen Hope, for our famous Plead the Fifth section of the show, we're going to ask Jen to self-diagnose herself. She'll have fun with that, so will you. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank. And Plead the Fifth is brought to you by our corporate sponsors. We want to thank Ideal Life 360, Cornerstone Financial, First Underwriters Insurance, the Kitsap Sun Newspaper Group, BC Fitness Studio, and the Upstart Group. Please visit our website at www.shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle to learn more about these terrific companies. Now back to the show.
Okay, welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. I'm co-host Linda Popke. Our guest today is Jen Hope, which has a wonderful name. We're glad to have Hope on the show. For our next segment is Plead the Fifth.
Plead the Fifth, Jen. We're going to pepper you with some more questions. We might be turning up the heat a little bit. You can plead the fifth once, but only once. That doesn't happen in real life, as we probably saw during the course of the year. People got to plead the fifth a lot, but we can only plead the fifth once, and after that we can really ask you whatever we want. Just kidding. We're gonna just have some fun with this. I mentioned though that you got to self-diagnose yourself. Jen, we know that we can be our own worst critics, and sometimes we can be much too hard on ourselves or have some challenges. Plead the fifth. Share with us what you most struggle with in your business life or personally. What do you most struggle with? What are you challenged with?
All right, I'm going to give you the realest answer.
The
Being
real
a parent, being a parent. I'm the
Ah,
hardest on myself about being a parent, for sure. Business, yeah, I thought that was one of those areas where I thought like, oh yeah, that will be the hardest, right? As a professional, we can always do better. We can always be learning. Being a parent, totally different story. I'm definitely hardest on myself about that. I want to do that job really well.
That's great. And let me tell you, it keeps going and it keeps evolving. So the challenges change over time.
hey, Linda,
So
can I ask a follow-up really
sure,
quickly?
go for it.
You know, it's interesting you bring that up because so many of the people that you're probably working with, and so many, like, they're also parents. And my kids are all grown up. Linda's is all grown up, and so we we're a little bit past that stage. Talk about some of the challenges that you see with just the people you work with, and what advice would you give somebody listening to this on kind of balancing being a parent and being a boss?
I think one of the biggest things that we can do is know that we can always start again. And there isn't anything that's like beyond, right? Like there isn't a day that like you screw it up forever, right? Like we don't, it's not, it's an ongoing relationship. And what I try to think about, and I ask, definitely encourage clients to think about, is how we invest today to have relationships when my kids and our kids are your kids' age, right? So what are we doing today? How does it look? How do we show investment now so they know how much we care when they get to that age and they can see it?
So kind of following on that, which is maybe not about your kids, but yourself, if you could go back and give advice to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell her?
That she had more answers than she knew, probably, right? I think I had a lot of doubt, and maybe saw myself as like as a rebel, and I really wasn't. I was kind of just following where I was meant to be, right? And I didn't know how much of that would work in my favor later.
This is one of my favorite questions because I feel like I always learn something about our guests. You got to stop doing what you're doing. We're going to make you start a brand new business. Maybe it's a side hustle, who knows, but you got to start this business based on a hobby. What would the hobby be? What would the business be?
It would be a boutique group fitness studio. So I've been a side hustler. I've been teaching group fitness as a side hustle for a long time, 20 plus years. And I would start my own facility. I would bring quality, low judgment fitness to people in the Seattle area.
And here, I thought you were going to do something about your dogs because you know you have dogs. So
Can I throw you for one more loop? I
Yeah.
also would love to be a DJ. Don't tell anybody. But I would love to.
Okay.
I would have loved to be like an EDM DJ.
Well, now
like
that's
somewhere.
fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't tell anyone. You just told us 7.5 listeners.
No.
But
I
you
know.
could be the EDM DJ at the fitness studio. So
I did it, Linda. I did it. I taught Orange Theory, and my classes would tell you like I was definitely a glorified DJ in that scenario.
there you go. There you go. Okay, so let me ask you something else. If you were going to have a dinner party with anyone, dead or alive, who are the 2 or 3 people you'd want to have with you, and what questions would you be asking them?
My number one is Fred Rogers. I think that man is so tender. I just can't get enough of how tender he is, and his perspective on how we talk to children, like, just melts me. I am a big Brene Brown fan, so I'd love to chat with her and get her swearing around my dinner table. That sounds to me like the best, to get her dropping her spiciness around our dinner table. And then one of my favorite musicians is Dave Matthews. And so I'd love to chat with Dave about music and his experience, life on the road, how he balances life on the road as a parent would be a really fun question to talk to him about, right? And so those are my people.
So that's interesting. Brene Brown and Fred, Mr. Rogers. One's
Yeah.
spicy, one might not be so spicy. I'd like to see you balance that, or maybe Dave Matthews will just write a song to it or something. That
Exactly.
so listen, leadership consulting. There's a lot of different consultants out there, a lot in many different genres, but just from a whole, when we talk about working with leaders, it's an industry, and it's a job. It's your career. What do you like most, and what do you like least about it?
What I love about it is seeing people's aha moments that they created, right? So I'm the mirror and they share it and I give it back to them, and it's their insight, right? It's not the data that I bring. It's none of that. It's their own insight and their resource that gives them the insight that they needed. That is amazing. I think what I see that I don't like about it is that there maybe aren't enough companies out there invested in the middle manager at the moment. These folks who are stressed out, right? And that those aren't the folks that we're focused on right now. Like, we have lots of data that suggests that that's the most stressed person in any organization, is the folks who are in senior management, middle management. And so more resources for those folks.
So I want to ask you something. One of the things that some of us do for self-care is late at night or on a weekend or whatever, we binge a little bit on what's streaming. What's your latest binge watch? Can you share with us what you've been binging?
I've been binging a show created by Dan Levy called The Big Brunch on HBO. And so it's like in the vein of Great British Bake Off, which is very much my genre. And it's got, I'm going to mention it again, swearing, which is something that I appreciate, and something that you don't get on Bake Show. And then also Dan Levy, who is just one of my favorite humans. And so Dan Levy plus food, plus people getting the break that they likely really need and deserve. It's got all the makings of my favorite things.
All
sounds
right.
like-
So I have a few of your favorite things too, which is also, I think, a Christmas song in there somewhere, but I've got a few of you. I read your bio and it says that you might be caught singing to music that's being played at your grocery store or CVS or whatever. So in line with that and your whole DJ thing, would throw you up into a karaoke. What are you picking to sing? What is your go-to song?
Southern Cross, Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I
Deep
did not
cuts.
see
Deep
that
cuts.
coming.
Not
I did
EDM.
not.
Not EDM.
Ta-da! Dan, you'll get to figure out. You won't know it's coming. I know that we've just met.
That was a mic drop if I ever heard of us. Crosby, Stills, and Nash, Southern
Oh,
Cross. Oh my
favorite
gosh.
group. Yeah, that's a great song. I love
It
it.
is.
That's
I
fantastic.
have really cool parents.
All right, cool. Well, Jen, thanks so much for being a guest here on the Shrimp Tank. For our listeners that want to get in touch with you, learn more about you, how can they get more information?
I am at Hey Jen Hope, all the places, Instagram, my website, LinkedIn as well. Yep.
Okay, that's fantastic. And make sure you check out all the replays on shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle, wherever you get your podcast, iHeart, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, because Dan, we are
ubiquitous.
And follow us on our show's social media pages on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.
Well, Jen, it's been a true pleasure. We've got a lot of hope right now in our podcast and into next year because of your great advice and input. We really enjoyed having you on the show. Thank you for being here. Linda, as always, thank you. I guess I'll be seeing you in 2023. Happy Hanukkah to you. And we'll see you next month. Everybody, do exactly what Linda said. Like us on our Facebook page, because then you can live stream just like we're doing right now. Our next show will be at 12 p.m. Pacific on Wednesday, December 21st. my co-host is going to be kind of a surprise co-host. So you're going to have to tune in to listen. Our guest is a good friend of mine named Tim Forrest. Tim is an expert, a consultant on helping turn people's favorite recipes into a booming restaurant business. So we're going to be talking food. Jen, you're going to have to tune into that. It may not be baking, but it's going to be food related. Everybody, in the meantime, be safe, be well, and be prosperous, because until next week, the shrimp is back in the tank. So long.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.